Alright guys, so it is now the next week and I want to wish you guys a happy new year because it is now January 4th and I have had to wait to get some final parts in that I need to finish out this build. So the last run of tubing that needs to get made goes from this port down here, is going to go up across here and up to there. I probably explained that before. So I wanted to get this Y splitter piece right here, so you can see this with the green will screw into the radiator. This will be for a ball valve so that I can drain the system as needed, and this is where the tube will go. So this will sit right over here. And this is actually a rotary adapter too, so I can spin this knurled area right here. The actual like cube up here spins around that, so I can, you know, orient it like this so that the valve is tucked away or not even there. And then if I need to drain the system, I can just rotate it this way. Actually, maybe I should just install it this way. Anyway, this is going to go here. And of course, I do have a ball valve right here. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to return this because the valve doesn't close completely. So if we look here at this, so here the valve is supposed to be completely open. And you can see that this is not perfectly parallel with below. And then if I try to close it, I can't close it past there. And actually, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look in here, there is a tiny gap in between the area that's supposed to seal by my thumb here and the actual rotating component inside the ball valve. So I'm gonna have to return that, but that's not a big deal because I can basically finish the loop right now, and then I can just plug this port right here. So I'll just go ahead and unscrew this plug here in the radiator. And by the way, these plugs that come in the radiator, they don't fit snugly and they don't have a seal on them. They're just there to basically close off the system to contamination. So you're gonna wanna put, if you need to plug something, you're gonna wanna put, you know, an actual correct plug that has a rubber seal on there. So we've got this screwed in, and you can see that the cube is spinning about the bottom. And you can actually use this to kind of torque this down a little bit. So I'm going to orient this so one of the ports is facing out, and just make sure that I get that torque down. These don't have to be like insanely snug, but if I want to rotate this the other way, I don't want it to unscrew at all. So the breakaway torque for the base, I want to be a little bit more than the torque to spin this thing around. So got that in place, and now the last thing to do, well actually, not the last thing to do, what I need is another package of fittings. Let me get this open really fast. Got another package of fittings here. I'm gonna take this top part off. There's a seal right there. Put that, where's my box? Put this back in the box. This right here, we will screw onto the top here. Torque that down. Hold the rotary part in place as best as possible. That torque down, sweet. So that will obviously accept the tubing right here. So what I could do is, you know, I could just put this straight up. I've got a lot of scrap pieces here. You know, could just have this go straight up and then, you know, curve over this way, and then just, I can rotate this, you know, like this. And I could just, you know, 90 it over and complete the connection up there up top. But I want this to look a specific way. What I want is for the tube to be like right in line with these other tubes, you know, because it would be out here, but I want it to be like right in here. And so this is going to be a pretty complicated bend. And what's going to happen is I'm going to have to go out of here 45 degree a certain length to make sure that the position of this is correctly right in between there. Another 45 to get it up there. Then we'll do a 90 up here. And the thing to note, then we'll do a 90 up here. And might even need to bend it back into the case a little bit to meet up with the fitting up here correctly. So this is going to be a pretty complicated bend. And what I'm going to do for this final one, so I actually redid this bend because before it was kind of sticking up a little bit like this, and I just couldn't deal with it. So I redid that bend, had to get more tubing. I ordered another pack of tubing because I know that this bend is really long, and if I screw this bend up, I'm going to waste an entire tube. So this one has got to be right. But anyway, I'm going to try to walk you guys through how I'm going to measure this out. And this might be kind of lengthy, but I am kind of a perfectionist. Part of that comes with being an engineer. But I really want this to just be snugly here because I think this looks really sick with like the 3 pipes just right next to each other. What I have right here, and obviously I screwed up, I've got a lot of scrap pieces around here. I screwed up a lot of these before I realized that I had this thick gauge soldering wire. And what's nice about this is it's very flexible, so you can bend it easily, and you can, bend it back into place on itself and get these tight bend radii. But it's rigid enough to hold itself in place when you're working through some of these bends. So, like for example, when I did this one, when I redid this one right here, I basically made an S-shaped bend like this, lining it up through there, and then I could, take, like, for example, if it was from here to here, I could take that measurement, throw that on some graph paper, and make sure that I got it exactly how it needs to be. This one was really important to get exact because if it was too long or if it was too short, it wasn't gonna mate up correctly with the ends. And there's only just enough tubing sticking off the end here to actually go into the fitting, not much more. So I really needed to get a lot of these just kind of perfectly right. So I'm gonna get this as straight as possible. It's probably not gonna be perfectly straight, but that's not a big deal. And what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start bending this wire, lining up with the places that I need to go, and, just kind of finesse it in there a little bit. And this might be time-lapsed on the actual camera, but I'll show you how I do this, and then we'll go over to the pad and paper. Okay guys, so I think that's about right there. So we've got a 45 back the other way, 90 here and 90 there. Thing about this 90 is, well, it might just work out, but this 90 might need to bend slightly in this way so that this can align with this port, which is not on the same plane as this port right here, and it's not on the same plane as this passageway right in between the two graphics cards and the SLI bridge right here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my pad and paper, and I'm going to like draw lines on the paper where the approximate distances are here so that we can get the bends in just right. Okay guys, so here we are at just some graph paper, and the graph paper is going to be really helpful for doing this stuff because look, I can line up this edge so that it's parallel with one of the graph paper lines and this edge so that it's parallel with that graph paper line. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 2 lines on here with pen, and notice how this is sticking up out of plane of the page. That's what I was talking about with this 90-degree bend up here. how that's going to have to go into the case a little bit. And, you know, if I let this rotate down, you can see that it would rotate into the case that way. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this out on the graph paper. All right, guys, so now you can see this and this are parallel with these two lines. And that's exactly what we want. So now we're going to check it in the system and see where we're at to understand where the next bend needs to get placed. And notice how I didn't need to use the bending tool for this one. I used it for this one to get that clean 45, but here, because these are two parallel lines right here on the paper, this has to be a 45 right here. And you don't necessarily need to use the bending tool to get a nice radius in there like that. And it's going to be 45 degrees. Now, it might not be the exact same radius as this one, but close enough. Okay, guys, so now we're just going to make sure that this, and I know it looks kind of crazy, but that this can approximately fit where we want it to. And at this point, it might even be a good idea to cut some of this off. So I think I'm actually going to do that. This is always really like nerve-wracking when you come in and cut this stuff, because if I cut this too short, so I'm not gonna cut it as short as it probably will be eventually, but if I cut this too short, then I've wasted the entire piece. So I'm just gonna pick kind of maybe halfway between the end of the piece and the bend. Cut that. So the nice thing about PETG is you just clip it with the clippers. So now I can kind of, it's easier to get it in the position that I want. And I think that this is going to be okay. So obviously this is going to get trimmed down here. But what I really want to make sure is that, and it's really hard to eyeball because the top of the piece is hitting the top of my case. But I want to make sure that I can really I got the right distance between here and here so that this tube can go perfectly in between there. And I think that it's going to work out just fine. But I am going to need to execute this bend up here in order to be completely sure. All right, so measuring this next one is going to be kind of an eyeball. I'm going to go from the end of this bend to the opposite side right here. Let's get my little tool here on the paper. And the other thing about this is, at the same time that I bend this 90 over here, I actually am going to need to curve it in. And so what I might need to do is just bend it 90 in plane, go to the system, check it out, heat it up again, and see if I can get that correct angle here. But first things first, let's lay this on the paper in a reasonable way. And we're going to go from about here to probably this line right here. And the reason that I draw the full line right here is because when I'm looking down on this and I'm sighting in the tube, I want to make sure that I get this right on the center line. Now, as it turns out, the diameter of one of these tubes is actually about the same width as two squares on the graph paper, maybe a little bit more. But as you can see, if I have a transparent end of the tube, I can sight in and make sure that the tube is right on the center line there, at least close enough within a couple millimeters, or a couple less than a tenth of an inch, maybe hundredths of an inch, in the correct spot. All right, guys, so we got the bend in there, and I actually didn't really end up using the bending tool that much, and unfortunately, you can see that the radius varies a little bit because I heated it too much on this end, and I wasn't getting the correct length there. And when I look at the bend from a couple different angles, I'm just not liking the way it's looking because I had to reheat a bunch of times. You know, that really sucks. It's also a longer length from here to here than I wanted or anticipated. I'm gonna go check this on the the actual computer and see how it's looking, but I might actually just scrap this and redo it again. That's kind of me being a perfectionist. Also, when I look at this other 45 degree that I did right here, it's not looking. It's just like a little bit of bulging that I don't like. So, you know, if you were doing this on your own or whatever, and you don't really care that much and you're not a perfectionist like me, this is going to work probably perfectly fine when you hold it up to the system. But I really wanted this to be, you know, a stark 90 at the correct bend radius in the correct spot right off the bat without a variable bend radius going through here. I just don't like that. So I'm going to tinker with this off camera, and when I get it in a position that I'm comfortable with, I'll show you guys the end result. But you can see that this is kind of the bending process, and it kind of sucks when you screw it up because then you gotta go back. So Jay's 2 cents. I mean, he obviously has done this way more than me. This is my first time. And he says that he never measures anything or whatever, and that's awesome. I honestly don't understand how he does it without measuring and just eyeballing. I mean, this is kind of like a precision bend that I'm trying to get in here. So, what's easier about the longer runs is that you have more room in between bends, so you're not heating in the same area that you've already done a bend, and you can fit it in the tool easily. You know, there's plenty of space on either end to fit, you know, the part into the bending tool and stuff like that. But what's harder about these longer bends is obviously if you screw up a portion of it, you're not going to have enough length left. You know, you've pretty much lost an entire tube. And the other thing too is, you know, fortunately you don't have to be exactly as precise because the longer it gets, the more flexible it's going to be. And so if you kind of have to like preload it into place, there's not going to be as much pre-stress on the seals or on the part. Not as much preload. At the same time though, the longer it gets, the more obvious it's going to be when there's like glaring errors. And I don't know what happened, but I definitely just was not heating this in the correct spot to get the bend in the right place, and then I had to reheat. So anyway, we're going to tinker with it off camera and then come back when it's done. All right, so I knew that I was going to rebend this, so I'm just mocking it up right now in the system. And look at where this tube is going relative to here. So that's going to be a significant twist in this area of the tubing for sure. Yeah, that's going to be a tough one to accomplish. Definitely. If I wanted it to just go straight over there, it would look like this, but what I really want is this to be as close to in here as possible. Now, the other thing too is you can see right here, I'm kind of covering up the SLI bridge right here, and I don't really want that. I could trim this down a little bit down here, or I could try and get the angle in between here to be more than 45 degrees, so it tilts a little bit more that way first, and that means that I need a tighter bend radius in here and a little bit more of an angle than 45 degrees. And that's okay because when making this bend, I proved to myself you can get a smaller bend radius on the PETG 14 millimeter tubing without getting any like weird kinks or anything like that. So I'm gonna try for a more drastic angle in here so that I can get over there faster. But the delta length in between here and here is good. That's exactly where I want this portion of the tube, is right there. Now, when coming up here to make this bend though, because of the fact that this angle is so drastic, it's actually really going to be a challenge to bend. So I'm going to have to do this off camera because it's going to be a lot of trial and error, and then come back to you guys when it's ready. But I mean, this looks pretty good. All right, guys, so we are going to go for the third attempt at making this final bend right here, before I can start filling the system and checking for leaks and basically getting it all up and running. So here's the first attempt at this bend, and you can see that this tube just goes straight into here, and I need it to go this way. Now, originally I was just going to reheat this and bend it back over, but I messed up. The bend here has a variable radius. You can see the radius of curvature is wider here than in this area of the bend. So I didn't really like that, so I wanted to try again. But what I did learn is that the distance between here and here is exactly how I want it. The only issue that I had with these bends down here is that you can see it's kind of getting in the way of the SLI bridge right here, and I don't want that. But look at how it sits right in between here, nice and snug. So what I did in order to gauge this angle right here was I got another piece of the soldering stuff. I lined it up so that one part was parallel with here, and the other part, well, this got a little bit bent out of shape. Oh, actually, maybe I had it like this. Yeah, so one part is parallel with here, and the other part goes in the direction of here, and I was able to gauge the angle. So I attempted the bend again. Here you can see with this piece, down here, well, down here I did a smaller radius here, and a more aggressive angle right here, so that now it sits a little bit lower, and that way I can clear this. So if I take this out really fast, of course I slam it against the computer again, against the radiator up there again, which I didn't want to do. So one note about these radiators is you really need to be careful with the perforation right here. If you actually put your nail in here, you will cause like a little bit of tear in the perforation. Now, it's not a huge deal if there's like only one of those, but you just want to be aware of that. So bent this other piece. This table's a mess. And if I just seat this in here really fast, just press that down in there. Now you can see that I clear the SLI bridge here. I have the same distance between here and here, so that sits nicely where I want it, but look what happened up here. When I was doing this bend, I accidentally dropped the bending tool and the bend had initiated, and I thought that, okay, well, I'll just make it a 90. You can see this radius is really tight. You can see some necking down in here, which really doesn't look very good. It's messed up, but the real problem is that it's too low. So it's hitting these other tubes back here. That said, though, I have another mock piece up here. The angle between here and here, you know, this angle, like this, is actually really good. I can work with that. If the angle is a little bit too shallow, I can always rotate the tube slightly this way or that way in order to get it to be correctly aligned with this other side right here. And because this next bend, which would technically be in this tube if I didn't mess it up, will be in the same plane as this, I can still do that rotation this way and that way, and it'll work. And the difference that'll make basically is this will either sit closer to the graphics card in here or further away, but it should be You know, a very minor adjustment in angle here will make a big difference in distance traveled over on this end. So I won't need to adjust the angle very much there. So I have one tube left long enough to attempt this bend again before I need to open up an entirely new pack of tubes, which won't come in until tomorrow. So what I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to try to bend this up, and we're going to do some different, I'm going to try out some different techniques for making this bend, because the hard thing about this is not only do I need to get this angle right here, but I also have to make sure that I get this 90 in here, and I have to make sure that the distance between the end of this bend and the start of this one puts the tube at the correct height above these two other tubes. So if you look at this one hanging down, I trimmed this one just so that I can mock stuff up and understand what angle I needed between, you know, here and this piece. But here, this is about exactly how far I want it to be above these two tubes. In fact, I might even want it to be just a little bit shorter by like a ½ inch, but I really want to get this effect of these tubes coming over each other, and then again that nice like 3 tube setup right here with one arching over and coming to the top. I think it's going to look really cool. Then of course you got this tube in the background as well, and you know, this tube back here in the background. So I think it's going to be really cool. And I know I'm spending a ton of time talking about this. We're going to get into attempting the bend, but just to show you guys really fast the other side, get some light here so you can see that this is just an absolute mess of cables and zip ties. This is the outlet. It's going to go down through there. Obviously, this is the pump and reservoir, which I've showed before. And then I just basically, I bundled all the cables basically as nicely as I possibly could, at least at my skill level with cable routing and stuff like that. And you can see there's a lot of loops in here and stuff like that to shorten things. We'll talk about that when we start filling, but I want to show you guys the back side. And we might as well just kind of go through, well, I'll actually do that later after I get the final bend. I was going to go through the direction of the flow and everything in here, but that's okay. So, you know, you might be asking yourself, Alex, why don't you just, you've got these extra 90-degree fittings right here, and you have more 90-degree fittings coming in the mail, like why don't you just make this with like 90-degree fittings and have it all be together? And that would be nice, except I think that this is going to look really sweet if it's just one continuous go without, the problem is, like, let's say I had a 90-degree fitting just sitting, you know, like right here, just kind of like floating in space. I just don't think that it looks that good. I mean, if I had this 90-degree fitting right here, this would simplify the process greatly, for sure, because then I'd only have to make this bend and this bend, boom, and then basically just a piece like this, single bend right here. And I'd be able to, you know, rotate this accordingly as needed for minor adjustments, or I can rotate it down here. But look how that's going to be here. I'm going to be blocking the LEDs from the memory. It's not going to be transparent. The fluid that goes through here is a little bit transparent, so I'd still be able to see those LEDs. I'm not going to get that effect of the LEDs kind of, you know, the light kind of shining around the tubing and kind of magnifying and dilating and stuff. And I might be blocking what it looks like here in the water block on the CPU. So fittings are obviously very useful. You know, I've put them in a couple key spots, you know, down here and in the back, specifically where I'm not going to be obstructing any LED lights or anything, or any like fan visibility down here. But I really wanted to avoid having just like a bunch of 90-degree fittings in the middle here. So just a little bit of insight in there to what's going on. And at this point, I've been talking for 10 minutes. So let's go ahead and get into just trying to do this last bend. So right here, what I've laid out is the various different distances that I need in order to accomplish this bend. So the first bend is from number one to number one. I'll go about 60 degrees and 60 degrees back that way in an S shape. I guess it's a Z. I guess it's technically more like a Z shape or whatever. But anyway, next I'll align the second part of the S shape or Z shape at this point, and I need to go all the way to this line, 2 over here. That sets the length between basically the bottom of the graphics cards, and so the tube can come up over the top of the other 2 tubes that are going in here. After I get that right and the angle right, then I have position number 3 to position number 3. That's simply just going to be, from the end of the second bend to, from the straight section that goes into the second bend to the 90 degree bend up here. So the path will be like kind of like that. And I have those all laid out, so let's get to bending. All right, so there is the first set of bends in there, and I gotta say that it's definitely not as nice as I want it to be. One of the issues was I didn't heat close enough to that piece of tape that I put down right here, and so you can see it's not as pretty as I want it to be, which sucks. I think I might actually cut this off and do it again, to tell you the truth. Yeah, I'm gonna cut it off and do it again. I think that there's still enough length left here to accomplish the total run. I'm just gonna double check that, and then I'm gonna redo this. I can't accept that. You can see right here, if you look at it this way, maybe I'm not oriented right, but it's not straight. This is where, sometimes perfect is the enemy of good enough. I mean, this will definitely work, but I need it to look clean, so. Alright guys, so here it is updated again. I didn't ask as much of the material in this bend. You can see this is a little bit more angled up in the direction of my index finger here than it was before. And you can see that the bend radii actually look a lot smoother. And part of that is because I wasn't asking, so much of the material to have a really tight bend radius. The only thing about this is if I put it on my, paper measuring here, I am just maybe 3 or 4 millimeters too wide, but that should be perfectly okay. The only thing that means is it's going to hug the graphics cards a little bit closer, and that's not really that bad as long as it's not contacting. I don't think it'll contact as well. So the next step, and also if you see me kind of touching the bends with my hands, it's because my hands are cold and I'm just trying to get it to cool down a bit faster. And one thing you can do, it's not a huge effect, but if you underbent this, like let's say, this didn't come out to be this segment and this segment weren't perfectly 90 or parallel, sorry, with respect to one another. Let's say it was underbent, like it was leaning out a little bit more that way. If you cool the inside first, that side will thermally contract and it will pull the bend in the direction that you want it to go. Similarly, if you overbent it, you could be touching the warm side first. It's not a huge effect, but I do think that it helps with kind of solidifying your bends. You'll put a little bit of preload into the material itself, but that's not a big deal because it's not like, it's not overcoming a huge amount of force. Anyway, so what I need to do now is the other piece that I have sitting in the machine over there, the angle between this and where the 90 needs to come off up here is good. So I want to use that as a reference template somehow, but I really don't want to screw this up again. And I need to make sure that I get the correct length, so I need to be heating in the right place, and I need to make sure that I get my bending tool in the correct place as well. So I'm going to off-camera experiment with a couple different setups. Try hanging stuff off the table, rigging, maybe rigging one of these up like this on the table or something like that. I'm going to do some experimentation. I'll be back. Okay, guys, so we're going to try something out like this, and this looks really crazy. So what I did was I took the bad piece, which is this one right here, and I just used some blue painter's tape to tape it to this other piece. And what you'll notice is that these two are totally parallel. Also, the distance between here and here is exactly the same, so that can line up. And because of the fact that they're parallel, that means that when I bend this that way in the direction of this, that will also be parallel too, and that will give me the correct angle between this and this. Now, I have a couple more pieces of tape on here as well. This bottom piece of tape is where the tool will sit in here and bottom out. Obviously, it'll be rotated more this way when I actually bend it, so that I bend in this direction. And this next piece of tape right here is put just before the first marking here, so I know exactly where I need to heat along this area. See, if you don't heat far enough back, in fact, it might even be worth it for me to move the tape a little bit further back, but if you don't heat far enough back, then what'll happen is you'll start bending here, that'll come down, and then in order to make the tool get flush with this, you'll actually start pulling the tool this way, and you'll put your bend in the wrong spot. So we're gonna try this out, and this is an absolutely crucial bend. If this bend doesn't come out exactly the way I want it, I will have to wait until tomorrow where I have more tubing and I'll have to do this process all over again. But I'm pretty confident this is gonna be okay. This is relatively easy to rotate because I have extra leverage with a little offset right here. I can get a good even heat, and then the center of gravity, like if I just hold this way, this piece actually wants to hang down pretty much like that. So when I initiate the bend, I can just let the weight of the tube out here and also the weight of the bending insert kind of start the bend for me in the correct direction. I can even kind of eyeball it this way, get the tool on there as it starts to bend, and then finalize the bend by eyeballing it like this, and closing one eye and looking at it in the correct angle. And again, this angle doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but what I want to make sure is that I don't twist the tube at all, because when you start twisting the tube like this, if it twists anywhere else here, it starts warping the tube. So let's give it a go. All right, so I got that bend in there. It's not necessarily the prettiest bend. You can see that there's a little lump right here. It's a little bit wrinkly down here, and part of that's because I had to reheat a bunch of times. One of the issues was I heated correctly, like enough down here, but I didn't heat enough over here. And so I was getting the problem where it wasn't fitting snugly in the tool. But if we look this way, so you can see this is coming down at an angle. This is a little bit shallow, but that is probably, less than 5 degrees. So I think that this is gonna work out fine. I really hate that I can feel a bump along here, but I really wanna try to finish out this last piece, because I'm honestly getting kind of tired of doing this, and it doesn't look horrible, and it'll look better when there's fluid in there. You won't be able to see that bump as much. So now I'm gonna go try and fit this up in the case and see how it looks. All right, guys, so this is actually looking pretty good. So I do have a little tail on here so I can adjust the height of this to make sure that I clear the graphics card. And you probably can't, the camera angle probably isn't awesome from your guys' perspective, but if I just line this up to where I can see it passing through the graphics card, I see that it's going above the lines right here by a decent amount, by not too much. This bend radius is almost perfect, and I did do a little bit of reshaping of this when I was laying it on the graph paper a second ago to make sure that this is perfectly 90, because if this isn't perfectly 90, then this side's going to ride up and it's not going to be parallel with the radiators and the rest of the case. And that's going to bug me, but this is looking pretty good. And now it is time to put in the final bend. Now, the nice thing about the final bend is the final bend is going to be in this plane. So I can lay this down onto the graph paper as needed in order to generate that bend. And I may not even use the bending tool for that. I may just try and approach it on the graph paper, but we'll see. It might be better to use the bending tool. I'll think about that. I believe that I have the distance correct for the bend. I'm going to check that out in a second, but I'm going to go ahead and check that out actually now off camera. And then unfortunately, I need this length right here, because when I bend this up, I'm going to need that adjustment up in this corner over here to be able to trim off like pieces if I need to, and also trim off from here. That said, you know, with that way, I can't like stick it in the case and really see exactly how it's going to fit up. So you kind of have to eyeball this stuff from different angles, kind of like outside the case, and see if you can position it in such a way. But anyway, I'm just going to make sure that I got the distance correct on this final bend. Then we're going to go for it. All right, guys, got it all marked out. Again, this piece of tape is where the tool is going to bottom out right here. This piece of tape is approximately where I need to start heating. I need to make sure that I get a nice even heat all the way about to here. And then what's going to happen is I'm just going to kind of let gravity do the work from here, let it pull into the tool, and then if it's not perfectly planar, I'll reheat it slightly again and make it plane on the little canvas that I have right here, and also make sure that I get that good, you know, guaranteed 90-degree bend. So we're gonna get started, and this is like the final countdown right here, because the you know, the build is like almost complete, and I really just want this to work out and this to get done so that way I can fill and check for leaks and basically get on with all the more fun stuff that is not as challenging as doing this bend. So let's go ahead and get started. I think I got it. I think we got it. It's the final piece right here. The bend is a little bit tighter radius than I was expecting. There is just a little bit of a kink right here, and that's because I didn't heat it far enough down here, and so I didn't get even heat all along this bend radius, and so it started you know, bottoming out against the tool too early on this side. But it's definitely a tighter bend radius than this tool, for sure, by a little bit, but it's not that noticeable. I think this is gonna go. So let's see if we can fit this up in the system. I'm really excited. I'm really happy that I didn't have to wait until tomorrow to get an entirely new pack of tubing and then probably waste like another bunch of those. By the way, this masking tape technique helps out a lot with just positioning things. Same with the graph paper for sure. The other thing about this is I did set it down on here, as you guys saw, so we're nice and plain. You know, this is in one plane right here. And with this masking tape, sometimes you will get a little bit of sticky residue on here. I mean, you shouldn't, because blue tape is designed to kind of peel off really easily. But if you do, you can just hit this with a little bit of rubbing alcohol and it comes right off. So let's try and fit this up. Okay, so let's see how we're looking right here. So we're going from up here to down there. And I know you guys can't see it easily on the camera, what it looks like down here from the right angle, but it looks like this is gonna go just right. What I'm looking for is does this line up with the fitting I have there? And does it line up also with the fitting I have down here? And I gotta admit, it's looking really good. And look at right here, look at how that nicely comes just above these tubes, almost up the same distance with how they're separated right here. So now all I have to do is get this trimmed up, and it should go ahead and go. So one thing to be aware of when you're trimming this is do not trim too close to the radius that you have right here, because a little bit of this, about 1/4 of an inch, needs to go into the fitting to correctly seal. So when you start trimming this down, be really careful, because on this piece right here, a couple times the piece that I actually bent was totally fine, but I trimmed it down too short and I couldn't get it to seal correctly in the fittings. So I'm gonna go ahead and trim this down and get it fitted up and show you guys me actually just finally putting it back in. All right, guys, here it is, the final run, going from this bottom 140mm radiator up to the 240mm radiator here up top. Now, I did need to finagle this a bunch. Actually, just a minute ago, I actually had to stretch this section a little bit because it was, I think, probably about, I don't know, 5 or so millimeters too short, which is really unfortunate. The other thing was the angle was too canted in that way, so I had to put another bend like right about here. If you look from this angle, you can kind of see it's a little bit wonky, but I went ahead and I just like plugged in some of the power cables up here so I can really get an idea of what it's going to be looking like in the front. And I'm thinking that this looks really good. I like how right here the CPU water block is kind of framed by that bend kind of perfectly. This right here, it's a little bit closer than I really want it to be. I was hoping that it would be more like right here. But I was really working this material a bunch right here, and you can almost see the plastic is a little bit thinner there. To be honest, I am getting more tubing tomorrow. I might try to redo this so that it looks clean again. So, you know, I was really excited about being able to fill this tonight, but I think I'm going to sleep on it one more day, look at it tomorrow, and when I get the new tubing in, I'm going to decide whether or not I want to redo this, because it's just hard for me to live with this inconsistency through this section right here. You know, this probably will work perfectly fine. It's not going to leak or anything like that. I've mentioned that with several of these bends, but I can't deal with it not looking perfect. That's just me. This being my first setup, I want it to be good. And the other thing is, you know, once I fill it, you know, if I stop liking it, if I stop liking the way that it looks, I'm not going to want to I'm not going to want to drain the system just to replace a bend. So, but I think that, you know, you guys get the gist of what the system's going to look like here. The cabling, I wish that I could get custom cables with my power supply. Unfortunately, it comes with like these yellow braided ones, just kind of naturally coming out the back of the power supply. I don't like how kind of bulky and wide these cables look right here, but it doesn't look bad, and you can really see the system here without any wires in front. So one thing that I really like about the liquid cooling setup and then having, you know, the IQ Commander, is the IQ Commander has a bunch of fan slots in here, and that way you don't have fan cables like kind of going into like random areas of the motherboard here and there. You can really just kind of cleanly see the motherboard, the cooling system, and then all the wires are kind of out over here in a space that you space by the radiator. I did decide to mount my IQ Commander down in this area because there wasn't enough space for another fan because this fitting is in the way. And because if I was to mount this in the back, I showed you guys the back earlier, it's just really a mess of wires, and I didn't want to add to that. And I don't think it looks bad being down here in the corner at all, honestly. When this is lit up, and you know there's purple fluid in here, and we've got like the hue of purple and white kind of colors scheme going on here, I actually think this is going to be illuminated really well with the purple zip ties. And actually this thing has a magnet inside it. So it just kind of clips in there in place on its own with the magnet, and you don't really need to tie it down or anything. And what I did for the bracketry is I had some brackets from the pump and reservoir that came with that. I just threw the 120 millimeter fan one on here with some zip ties, so it's easy to take off. I don't have to unscrew anything, and then, you know, just started kind of feeding wires into the right spot here. So this is what it's looking like. I'm gonna sleep on this, decide whether or not I want to rebend this line. I had to do some really kludgy stuff with this. Like I was flipping it out here and using the heat gun on it outside, you know, without the bending insert because I wasn't really doing any bends. I just needed to stretch this section right here. Had to do that like a bunch of different times to really get the fitment to be exact. It's kind of hard for me to believe that I'd get the fitment to be exact even if I was to do this like, you know, 6 or 7 more times. The fittings do screw in nice and easily though with this bend, which is a good sign that it's seated correctly in the seals. And so, you know, things are looking parallel and even, and I mean, I suppose that it looks okay, but I don't know, I'm just being a perfectionist here. So in the next segment, maybe this will be rebent. I'll let you guys know. But likely the next segment is going to be filling the system, which I'm super excited for. So I'll catch you guys in another day, actually. And hopefully we'll get to that tomorrow night.
Hey guys, here I am again with another hopefully quick little outro. Again, thank you guys for making it to this portion of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I know that this particular segment, part 5, was a little bit longer than the other ones, but there wasn't really a good spot to kind of cut it off when it transitioned to the next day. And I also did want to get you guys through basically up to the point where the loop was pretty much completely done, and the next portion would be filling up the system. So again, guys, hope you guys enjoyed that. A couple key takeaways from this one: you can use some thicker gauge soldering wire to help you measure. Obviously use the graph paper, use the carpenter's square, etc. Order more tubing. I've mentioned that before. And then you might have to do some trial and error and mock stuff up in the system and do it again. But if you really want to get those bends to be exactly how you want, try out some of the techniques that I mentioned in this video. And shout out again to Jay's 2 cents for being able to do stuff like that, just kind of by eyeballing it and having it turn out clean. So thanks again for watching, guys. And in the next one, we'll fill up the system. Later.